Hello students, welcome back to our lecture series on visual semantics for visual communication, and today we will discuss further in accordance with our last discussion where we were discussing visual composition and various elements and principles of visual communication. We discussed about various elements of design composition already, which consists of points, lines, shapes and forms, textures, patterns and color, and color again could be broken down into hue, value and saturation. So, all of these elements together in combination or in exclusion in various combinations, all of these elements together form a visual communication, and we have explained this in terms of in accordance with drawing by a child, where as a child you would draw houses and mountains with some trees and with a sun peeping out from the mountain. So, this is a very basic composition we have all very familiar with. We perhaps also have drawn ourselves, we have seen at some point of time in our lives, and that is the same example I am taking and making you understand or making you aware of various elements and principles of visual composition. So, having said or discussed about various elements of visual composition, now the question arises, how do you put together these elements, or what should be the logic, what are the laws, what are the theories, or what are the principles which are working in the background all the time and bringing them together to form a visual communication or composition. A visual composition is essentially made by a particular individual for some amount of communication or information to flow from there. So, if we refer back to this particular drawing, this is the drawing we were discussing, and I will take it from there for our discussion for principles of visual communication. So, the first principle that we are going to talk about, is that of balance. So, as the word indicate, a balance is something which brings equilibrium. So, a balance is related to equilibrium or stability or a sense of stability. So, any visual composition, the very first thing that a communicator tries to achieve is balance. Many a time the communicator essentially or intentionally creates an imbalance within the visual composition. We will talk about that a little later, but ideally there are various visual balance which are indicated or which are transacted or which are enacted upon in a visual composition, and balance could be of various types. There could be symmetrical, so there could be symmetry and there could be asymmetry. So, there could be a symmetrical balance coming into picture and there could be an asymmetrical balance coming into picture. For example, if we look at this particular drawing again and try to explain balance in this particular composition. So, as a question I would ask that, do this composition look balanced? If I show you this composition, does this composition seem to be stable? Does this composition seem to be in equilibrium, in a state of rest? Probably the answer would be yes, because it relates to certain qualities of balance, and these qualities of balance are, there is a sense of symmetry. So, if I take an axis through this, so if I make an axis like this, I could see a symmetrical layout, or I could see a symmetrical composition here which adds on to the quality of balance over here. So, if we look at this particular composition now, we see that the left side of the composition and the right side of the composition are more or less in a symmetrical manner. However, now at a closer inspection you would see that there exists asymmetry. Of course, there exists asymmetry. There is a sun peeping out here, there is no sun over here. There is a tree over here, there is no tree over here. So, there is no one-to-one correspondence along this axis, but still a sense of balance is achieved, and this is what is called the asymmetrical balance when we talk about balance using asymmetry. So, you can see that the sun perhaps is being balanced by these birds, which are as such not correlated to each other or are not congruent to each other. However, they are balancing this, or perhaps the tree is being balanced by this stream or these series of flowers over here. So, there could be a sense of balance within asymmetry. So, it is not always essential that you will have a symmetrical balance. Not everything on earth has to be symmetry. As you might be aware, I many a times ask my students to go out and look into the leaves and flowers. If you look into two leaves of the same tree, not even two leaves, look at the same leaf, look at its axis and look at both parts, both are asymmetric, they are dissimilar. And if you look at two leaves of the same leaves, they are very, very dissimilar. So, in other words, in nature we always experience a level of asymmetry, yet we always experience a sense of balance. So, any visual composition, because we grow up in nature, in the environment around us, and we see around us this kind of a setup, our visual composition also has to honor this particular principle of balance, where we have symmetry and asymmetry both in place and both having equal weightage in our visual composition, and both could be used in design as and when it is required. So, a matured visual designer would utilize this concept of symmetry and asymmetry. Now, let us talk about another aspect of balance, and this aspect of balance could be axial or radial. So, there could be axial balance and there could be radial balance. So, as it is understood that if we draw an axis and if we have balance formed based on that particular axis, that creates an axial balance, whereas if we have something based on radialness, that creates a radial balance in place. So, these are based on geometric variations of balance based on how you are placing your elements within the visual composition, and we use this particular principle for its for achieving its equilibrium. Now, let us talk about the next very important and very fundamental principle which we experience many a times in nature, which is fundamental to nature, is rhythm. So, there is rhythm in nature, we see rhythm all around us when we are talking, when we are speaking, when in a visual field we see rhythm taking place. And if we again refer back to this image, how rhythm is coming into picture, you see the mountains, they are repeated. So, rhythm has a notion related to repetition. So, there is a repetition of this particular form, there is a repetition of this particular form, there is a repetition of these lines, there is a repetition of these lines, which creates a sense of rhythm. There is a sense of harmony, there is a sense of flow, and there is a sense of repetition within that. So, a rhythm is achieved in a design. Many a times rhythm leads to movement, or dynamism. So, many a times rhythm leads to the movement in a particular graphic or a visual communication design, and many a times rhythm leads to the static nature or leads to the static harmony, as you might say. So, it may create a movement. Say if I use these kind of lines in a particular composition, as you have seen, I have used certain elements in a particular order in this particular space. So, I have given space within that, this line and space, that is all. Element wise it has got only line and space, but because of this repetition, this is creating a sense of rhythm and a sense of movement and a sense of dynamism over here. Whereas, this same rhythm can create a sense of harmony. Say we add few more lines over here, so it creates a sense of harmony now. It creates a sense of staticness. So, there is rhythm which is happening, there is repetition which is there, but that is creating a static harmony, which is also very prevalent when rhythm is used in terms of creating patterns. So, rhythm is many a times used, this particular principle is used to create an element of patterns, where say for example, you can see this grid. I hope you can see this grid in this particular page. So, I am repeating the lines and it is creating a pattern. So, this creates, there is a rhythm of lines, and let me add one more line here. So, I am adding this red line in every alternate box. So, I have added this red line in every alternate box, and I have added this purple line in every alternate box here. So, together they create a rhythm. There is a rhythm in this particular visual composition. Because of this repetition of certain form or certain lines, this particular rhythm is created. And however, look at this particular image which I have showed, which creates a form of movement and dynamism, whereas if you look at this particular form, it creates a sense of staticness and harmony. So, rhythm acts both ways in creating movement, creating a very dynamic approach within the visual composition. At the same time, the same principle could be used for creating a static nature. So, now we talk about something which relates to harmony and emphasis. So, this is something we often rely as visual composer, or when we talk about visual composition, we try to create a harmony, which we already talked about. The rhythm proceeds to creating certain amount of harmony. So, there is a sense of harmony in the particular graphic. So, if we again refer back to this particular image, there is lot of rhythm happening, there is lot of elements being used, there is a sense of balance, all of it is creating a harmony in this particular visual composition. However, we also need to emphasize certain things in this composition. Otherwise, the principally we are not really trying to communicate or give an answer to one of your query. So, now if I show you back again this particular graphic, if we look at this particular graphic and we talk about emphasis, what is that one thing or two thing which is creating an emphasis in this entire drawing? Perhaps it is the sun. So, my notion of emphasis could be in this sun, or it could be in this particular house. So, there has to be some amount of emphasis. So, you can see now I have taken help of hue to create an emphasis within this particular composition. So, even till some time back, this particular composition was lacking was very much harmonious, but as soon as I started adding hue and did certain amount of elemental change to this particular composition, it is leading to an emphasis of a particular point. So, this is a very key discussion that we are doing about visual composition. When it comes to visual composition, always keep in mind the space that you are providing. As I mentioned in when we were discussing space in terms of element, you will have a ground and you will use several figures on this ground using various shapes, lines, colors, textures, etc. So, you will add on, you will keep on adding on this thing in your visual composition. So, that is when you are designing. When you are observing, you are also witnessing all of these things, a harmonious visual stimuli hitting you, and you are observing all that and you are perceiving that. So, now the question arises, if it is all harmonious, if it is all static, what is that you are focusing on? As a visual communication designer, it is very key for one to understand whatever the figure is doing or figures are doing, whatever the ground is doing, is all ultimately trying to emphasize on a particular message. So, now you see our previous discussions about cooperative communication, human communication, all of that is boiling down into some of these principles where we are talking about various key elements and principles coming together to service or to function to cater to these human communicational needs. So, are we being able to share something? Are we being able to request something? Are we be able to inform something or respond to a particular request or a need or a question? So, in order to achieve these intents, or there could be other intentions as well, there could be social intentions, there could be communicational intentions, there could be referential intentions. In order to satisfy all of them, are we being able to harmonize them into one context? Are we being able to harmonize them because it is not jari to the viewer, jari to the recipient? At the same time, you will have to keep in mind that you have to emphasize on one or two key informational need that you are trying to achieve through this particular visual composition. In other words, whatever elements that you are using in this composition, be it figure, be it ground, they should all work in unison to create an emphasis towards the message. Ultimately, it is the message, it is the informational content that we talk about when it comes to visual communication design. We talked about that yesterday, how the visual communication design impacts people, their knowledge, behavior, attitude, and then again that affects visual perception to a certain extent. So, that creates an understanding of harmony and emphasis when it comes to visual composition. Now, we look at another very key aspect of visual composition, that is the contrast. So, if we refer back to this particular image again, if we refer back to this particular image, we see I have used some kind of hue or textural quality, and why I have done that? I have tried to create a contrast. So, a contrast relates to the difference between one and the other. As we use contrast colloquially also, it casts the difference, it enhances the difference, it enhances the difference between two entity. So, if you look at this particular graphic now, initially we started with a very plain flat drawing where we just used few lines, few shapes, certain amount of texture. We started from there, but now we are using hue and other elements to create some amount of contrast, and this contrast is creating a difference of this now with the rest of the drawing. So, the contrast is creating a difference between this and that. Many a times contrast relates to the quality of light, relates to the quality of shades and shadow, and that works towards creating contrasts. So, contrast is an essential element, essential principle we use, and contrast is such a scheme which cuts across elements and principles. So, if you see here, actually we used some of the elements to create contrast. So, we use the color, we use the texture, we use the lines to create a contrast over there, but that essentially serves a principle. The principle is we are trying to create a difference and act as a differentiator between different entities in order to emphasize. So, why we used contrast over here is to emphasize on the house and not on the other things. So, even though I have used the same hue for the sun and the house, by using contrast now I am slowly pinpointing on the emphasis of the house and not the sun. So, you can see how various differences could be created by these kind of principles being used in unison, in contrast to each other, or in accordance with each other. They are used many a times and all the time. So, the next thing we talk about is the size and proportion in a principle, when we talk about principle as such. So, the size and proportion concept of the visual composition also is very, very important, and another essential element or another essential dimension to the principle is scale. So, another essential dimension to the principle is scale when we talk about size and proportion. The size and proportion. So, they are all connected with each other. So, here if you look at this particular composition, there is a house and there is a tree. Do you relate to them by size? So, if I now draw a human figure which is like this, do you relate all of them together? Is there a size wise harmony which is happening over here? Perhaps not. So, the size of elements in a particular composition and how you are utilizing this size in your particular composition also plays a very, very important role when it comes to visual composition. So, say now I draw a person of this particular size. So, I am using a component of size with respect to, so if I am using 1.5 inch, say I am using 2 inch for this, I am using 1.5 inch or 2 inch again at this level, whereas I will use, I am sorry, let me use this particular pen. I am using another human figure here, which is obviously much lesser in size compared to this human figure. So, that creates a sense of space, a sense of harmony in this particular graphic. So, this is the importance of size in your graphic, and the size relates to proportion. So, if we draw a human figure this big in your composition, say we do not go by this human figure, we go by this big human figure in our composition, there the proportion is lost, is not it? You immediately say that this particular image or composition lacks proportion, it lacks an imbalance in terms of size, and an imbalance in terms of size refers to as proportion. So, classically it has been found that proportions which are relating to golden proportion seem to be much regular proportion in use, which looks pleasing to the eyes and which is used, I mean which is observed in nature in prevalence. So, many a times many proportions are referred to, or many proportions are crafted in accordance with golden proportion. However, if we look at this particular painting again, there is a sense of scale. The third word which we used is a scale. So, we understand that there is a scale that we are associating with this particular graphic. So, the scale here is a house is definitely not a 2-inch house, it is not a toy house we are talking about here. We are trying to represent a real time house which could be 20 feet. Actually, sorry, it is a 20 feet house which is being represented by 2-inch over here, and based on that proportionally we changed other elements in this particular composition, and what we are essentially trying to achieve is scale by doing this. So, a scale is here we are using a 1:x scale. Those who are in the profession of architecture are very prevalent with a scale of 1:100 or 1:200, or interior design. These kind of professions are rely on scale all the time, where you are actually scaling down a real time dimension into a smaller dimension, and the principle or the method applied here is the notion of scale, and scale relates to size and size relates to proportion. So, you achieve a proportion relating to the order of sizes or relating to the arrangement or incorporation of different sizes together. So, this brings us to another key principle which needs to be looked at, talked about, thought of when it comes to visual composition. Am I achieving the right proportion in the visual composition? Is the scale correct? Are the size in accordance with each other, or for that matter what is the size of the media that we are using for that particular visual composition. So, that brings us to the end of discussion of some of the principles of visual composition. So, by now we are acquainted with different elements of visual composition and different principles of visual composition, and all of these coming together forms a visual composition which is used for visual communication. And this particular visual composition, what essentially we are trying to achieve, which I have already repeated, I am repeating again, what we are essentially trying to achieve through a visual composition is to communicate certain amount of information. There is certain amount of idea which is there, certain amount of information which is there. There is a message, there is an observation that I am trying to communicate to you using a visual composition. Now, the point comes, how do you develop a visual composition which serves as a communication mode in an effective fashion? Otherwise, there is no point in making a visual composition for communication, isn't it? So, when we are talking about visual composition for communication, that means visual composition for visual communication, or we are designing a visual communication, we need to keep in mind all the elements we have talked about and all the principles we have talked about and how they are coming together and playing with each other. This needs to be practiced, this needs to be learnt, this needs an education and understanding, and hence visual semantics, this particular course equips us to understand the hidden aspects of visual communication design and visual perception, how it works, why it works, various methodologies revolving around it, and the meaning that it casts. So, this particular subject deals with that, but there are different other courses available which specifically talks about visual literacy, visual language, visual education, which is directed towards visual design. So, that brings us to the end of today's lecture. Hope you are enjoying this particular lecture series, and see you soon again with the next set. Thank you very much.